Now, the U.S. is ramping up airstrikes on Iran, threatening a major escalation. And American targets now include critical military infrastructure as well as energy plants and bridges. Iran has retaliated by striking U.S. assets across West Asia, while also hitting water and power facilities in Kuwait. While President Trump is threatening an even larger offensive, he has publicly discussed bombing Pickaxe Mountain, which is a deep underground Iranian nuclear-linked site. Reports indicate that the administration is also considering deploying ground forces to seize Iran's vital Kharg Island oil hub. The recent strike patterns offer major clues about future U.S. operations. Bombing runs have heavily targeted Iran's southern coastal regions. By hitting coastal military infrastructure, bridges, and rail lines, the U.S. aims to paralyze Iranian military logistics in the south. And reports also suggest strikes against Iranian Army's 88th Armored Division in the Sistan-Balochistan and the 92nd Armored Division in Khuzestan. Combined, these moves suggest a systematic U.S. shift towards a potential ground operation in southern Iran, and the campaign is clearly expanding beyond just protecting shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the groundwork for a ground campaign may have already been tested. In April, a high-stakes mission rescued the crew of a downed U.S. F-15E Strike Eagle deep inside Iran. Now, that emergency forced the Pentagon to infiltrate roughly 100 special operation forces into rugged Iranian territory. And to pull it off, the U.S. jammed electronics, bombed local roads, and bypassed air defenses, proving American boots can operate on the ground despite Iran's defensive posture. Now, prior to that crash, the Wall Street Journal had reported that the Pentagon was actively drafting plans for weeks of targeted ground operations. And at the time, President Trump has refused to rule out a ground deployment, stating a physical presence will be necessary if Iran refuses to back down. All right, now joining us live from St. Petersburg, Russia, is Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, international affairs analyst, author, and historian. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast with us. I'll begin with the question that Washington is still pursuing a limited military objective, or do you think this is gradually becoming a strategy for a ground invasion? And if yes, what is your opinion on it at this point of time?
Well, your introduction would suggest that the United States is doing what it ordinarily does in any of its wars of aggression by softening up the enemy, and that it is destroying assets in Iran that could be used to frustrate an invasion or any other military operation against the country. The statement that was included in your bulletin that there have been attacks in Kurdistan, of the Kurdistan part of Iran, suggests what has been hinted at for months and months, that the United States would try a multi-front attack on Iran, hoping to take advantage of dissenting nationalities who have their own interests in the country. Nonetheless, I think it is the consensus of geopolitical experts that Mr. Trump has no master plan. He has no strategy, that he has been reacting step by step in the conflict with Iran according to his instinct and emotion, and not taking into account all of the possible responses that could come from Iran should he proceed, and particularly should he proceed with a ground invasion. If it's limited just to Kharg Island, it becomes rather senseless, because the effect of imposing this blockade on Iranian ports and a blockade that is stopping all traffic through Hormuz, that makes senseless a specific attack on Iran's major export facility. Nonetheless, let's assume that some such plans are in the works. What my comments will be strictly in the domain of geopolitics, and not in the military aspect, because that is not my expertise.
Right. That being said, when we talk of geopolitics, now this whole thing began because both the countries were in talks for nuclear talks. They had to sit down and talk about nuclear energy. And U.S. and Trump has always been saying that we're not going to allow any kind of nuclear power to Iran. Now, what has been reported is that there's been a reported strike on the under construction WION nuclear power plant, which marks a new phase in this conflict now. So if the talks don't work, do you think that Trump would go ahead and attack these sites? Well, this one particularly does not really, according to IAEA, does not have nuclear power or weapons as such. But do you think that could be the possible aim for Trump at this point, that he's going to go ahead and for the attacks instead of talks, because the talks at this moment are not working?
Well, instead of having a military strategy, Donald Trump has political theater. And attacking that facility under construction would suit him perfectly. First of all, not expose anyone to nuclear radiation, to leaks, because the reactor is not operational. It is in construction. Nonetheless, the impact of such an attack would be to prompt one of several possible Iranian strategic responses to an American attack in general. And that would be to appeal to Russia and also, of course, to China for military assistance, something which Iran has not done. Why do I say Russia? Because the nuclear plant that is under construction is a Russian plant. The Russians are deeply interested in it, and it would terribly embarrass President Putin if Iran made this request, because within Russia there is considerable support for Iran's position. And there is the knowledge that if Iran is conquered, if it is laid low, if they have regime change in Iran, that would be one of the important steps in subduing both Russia and China. So in this instance, if there were such an attack, if Russia were appealed to, I think it is conceivable that they would satisfy the Iranian demand for opening a second front against the United States.
And that's an interesting international take. But when it comes to the conflict is unfolding just months before the U.S. midterm elections, how much domestic political consideration or constraint can any decision to launch a ground invasion or such kind of attacks would it take for the U.S.?
It is very strange that such an attack is being entertained, because it has no political support in the United States. The majority, according to polls, most Americans, including a large minority of Republicans, are opposed to continuation of the war against Iran. And so it would do great damage to Trump if he persisted with such an attack.
And as you also mentioned, that there is no clear end game in sight when it comes to all these missions happening. Trump keeps saying that there are possibility of talks. Marco Rubio has been the latest one to say that we're still going for talks. We're open to talks. At this point of time, what is the realistic U.S. exit strategy if Iran refuses to back down? Especially when Iran is now, of course, attacking the Gulf states at a pretty extreme levels now.
Well, let's not speak about exit strategy in the usual sense, because that is rational and subject to considerations of a military nature as well as a political nature. However, Trump engages in political theater, and he insists on dominating the world stage, and in stating repeatedly and insistently that he is in control of escalation, and that his enemies or opponents will be subdued and forced to accept his terms. Whether that represents reality or not is irrelevant to him. And so he may have no real exit strategy, but will cover that, or try to cover that, by a lot of talk, and by doing things that capture the imagination of his MAGA group. Whether they have any practical effect on the outcome of the war is almost irrelevant. It is all theatrical. It is trying to present the United States as the world's greatest and historically unparalleled a force in the world, which he says every other day, and to ignore the reality on the ground. He may get away with it, and perhaps he won't. The elections will decide that.
Right, well, of course, the elections come right when these attacks are happening. It's just an escalation what we see right now. We'll have to wait and see how that one goes out. Thank you so much, Dr. Doctorow, for joining us on the broadcast and giving your perspective. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.